Okay, so shadowland planning is scenario planning. It's planning within a matrix of known unknowns. So you basically say, this is devised by the military. It makes a lot of sense if you really get into it. It has its own internal feedbacks so that you assign descriptors, values, probabilities. So a description, relative values that in various different metrics, how impacting it is to you, how expensive it is to you to deal with this particular item, those kind of things, right? So it tends to isolate and crystallize your thinking about individual elements within your matrix of the shadowland, which is you going through time in a period where you can't make decisions, but you know you're going to have all of these problems that will show up, but you can't really plan for them now. So you have description, you have values, you have your assumptions that about how those became, the description exists and how your values are. These are all related to your assumptions. So, you assume that water is one of your primary needs. Well, it is. And so, because of that, you better take care of your water supply, that sort of thing, right? So if you're living in a desert and your water supply is depending on pumping this stuff out of the ground, and it takes a lot of electricity to do that, then your assumption that water is important and it depends on electricity. Let's just put put electricity there, supply chains, and so these might be the primary elements of life, the electricity that is necessary to get them, or maybe it's the diesel in order to get the fuel to the electricity, which would be a genset in order to pump the water out of the ground, right? So you have all of these interlocking dependencies on your existing infrastructure. That existing infrastructure has assumptions about how it's going to fare in a period of time where you're in the shadowland and you can't make an accurate determination about how reliable is my diesel supply. Seems good. But, maybe there's a diesel shortage on the East Coast to such a degree that they take diesel from West Coast refineries and move it, thus depriving people on the West Coast. It's happened before. We saw such things in the Berlin airlift in Europe. So it can happen again. So you validate, okay, so in the shadowland here, there's two things you need to know about this. The process is iterative, so you keep coming back to it, and you shift your whole matrix through time with your progress in the shadowland. And as you shift it in time, you come back and revisit these various elements to see how well you're holding up in those elements, but also how well your planning was for those elements. So one of the things we might look at would be, say, diesel supply, right? And so right now, I think I'm doing pretty good on diesel supply. I got that IBC out there pumped up. I'm putting my stabilizing fluid or chemicals into the diesel, and I'm all set to take that 257 gallons of diesel into the future. And so that's my plan, right? And so I took my diesel mark off and it's done. And then later on, when this whole thing has been shifted forward, say 3 months into the future, then I come back and I examine my diesel. If I can get power, if I had enough diesel, maybe I could make another video, right? Maybe that 257 gallons of diesel was nowhere near what I need, right? And so it runs out maybe in the first 3 months because I got to drive like hell, or who knows what's going on. Anyway, though, my point being that I re-examine the elements as we go forward, and then I assign a value. One of the values I assign is a rating on an estimation, a rating on how well our descriptions and stuff did on what date that we did them. So, so a rating on our process from the date of the inception. And so here we are 3 months later. As part of the process, I examined this information to see how well it did and fit that calculation back into here, saying, you know, because this whole thing shifted over, you got all your dots and so forth, and when you're examining this, you have assumptions back down here that you're writing, and you say, oh man, one of my assumptions right now is that my previous assumption that I knew what I was talking about is full of shit. I needed, you know, 4 times as much diesel or whatever the hell, right? And so you critique yourself as you go forward, refining your ability to narrow in on those things that are going to cause you problems as you progress. And this is a process. It can be grueling, it can be terrible, especially doing it on a small scale, trying to focus on your own needs in the midst of all of this. But if you do this, you can discipline your mind to where you actually think about this stuff as you're going along, and as it's happening to you in real time, you will come up with the ability to map and plot your matrix of decisions to those events in that moment. And so you may not recognize it when you first enter into the shadow land, that such things will happen, especially because of the way we're going to go into it, which I'll get into in a second. But as you progress through, by the time you've been through, say, the first 3 months of the Shadowland, maybe you can make some much better decisions, because those first 3 months have just been really pressing on you, really grueling. You had to change so much that you've had to reanalyze everything, and so you've become just brutal on yourself in terms of getting into this process of anticipating. Now, see, bear in mind that this whole concept arises from a military environment where you should be getting brutal on yourself, because every time you make a bad decision, someone dies on the battlefield somewhere. And so it's very necessary that you reduce the amount of fuck-ups that you make. This process of Shadowland planning is critical at the beginning stage of companies and at the end stage of companies. Most companies don't know when they're ending, so they never do that, right? I've been involved with one firm that knew that they were going to come to a particular point and have to stop and cease operations and make some decisions. And so they invoked this whole process here near their last 18 months of operation. Brilliant people there. Anyway, though, the process of the Shadowland planning is something that you continue once you get into it, because you know you have to. That's because you're in the Shadowland. So part of the process of Shadowland planning is knowing, way out here that you're going to be getting into it and starting your planning process decades ahead of its materializing. And so that's what the SOC did, the self-organizing collective I keep talking about. They've been planning on this for decades, for where we're at right now. Now, we're going to be entering into the Shadowland. Here, let's just keep that in. We'll just say that that's the Shadowland boundary, right? And we're going to be entering into it as a lot of people, they'll just sort of creep into it, the normies, right? Just one day it's like, well, things don't make much sense, and then the next day it makes less sense, and so on. But they never really grasp that they've crossed over this boundary, so to speak, and they're entering into a, quote, new world as relative to how they must make decisions and so on, because everything is so uncertain. And this, the Shadowland planning, scenario planning, is intensely focused on the idea of uncertainty, how to measure it, how to figure it out, how to whittle away at it, because, so for instance, we know for sure we're going to have this stuff called problems, right? So because we know we're going to have problems, we can even identify some of the areas that we might have problems in, such as electricity, diesel, supplies, maybe toilets, who the hell knows? But in your particular area, you fill in as many of these dots as you can right now, as we're entering into the Shadowland, and we're going to cross this. We haven't quite crossed the boundary yet, certainly not for most people, because I think about things way the hell out here. But we're very, very, very close to crossing this boundary. And we will cross this boundary in this kind of a fashion where we escalate very emotional peaks very rapidly and then cave off to some degree. It won't be like that. It'll be, choppy crocodile teeth, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, gradually dissipating over decades. Okay, maybe that's 40 years. Maybe that's 40 years there. And you're about to hit a peak that will come in whoosh in a couple of weeks. Over the period of a couple of weeks, you'll go through this incredible giant peak in the emotional response of people to the events that will then have to be dealt with as we go forward, and that the events and that emotional peak combining in the feedback loop and everything will create the need for this Shadowland planning, because all of this shit that you usually take as the structure of your life is going to go to hell if it has not already. So bear in mind that in this Shadowland, not only are we going to have engineered diesel problems, engineered electrical problems, engineered medical problems, yada, 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 we're going to have actual reactions from people that led us up to the central bank collapse here. And then we're all going to go through the central bank collapse, and we will all have our emotions about it and stuff, but it's going to be piled on by the emotional state of that the same people, the Khazarian mafia, that are now behind our problems with money, currency, food, school, health, all of that shit. These people are responsible for all of that shit, and they're the central bankers, and they're fucking up, and their central bank is dying, and they've got no cover for it. They don't have a global world war. They've done it before. It's not going to happen this time. So anyway, so we're going to be going through all of this stuff in a very condensed period of time. It is not the usual kind of a progression of things through the social order. This is one of those very shocking kinds of slap you in the face sort of things. Anyway, so yeah, apologize for losing power earlier on this. I have to also be aware that I've got some other people showing up. So in your Shadowland planning, make sure that you validate your assumptions as you go along. Some Shadowland planning has formal processes, right? Like they've got diagrams and all this kind of stuff, and you project out when you're going to do your next meeting and so on. In like home meeting for, you and your family kind of thing, it makes sense to make a formalized notation in your lives that this process must continue. And so you say, everybody gets together for the family, you do your Shadowland planning, you get everybody involved, everybody thinks about it, you're thinking about it all the time, and then you say, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do X, Y, Z that we've planned out. We're going to take care of those things that we can identify now and deal with, and then we're going to make a point to meet here in a month and re-examine all the stuff that we're doing. Not that we're not going to do feedback loops continuously, but we're going to formalize the process of reviewing what we've accomplished. Makes you feel good over the last month. It helps you involve other people and get them motivated. All the various reasons for doing that, as well as refining your process as you go forward. So everybody's set of problems, this is set theoretic mathematics, by the way. You don't need any math at all, so don't get wound up about that. But we know we're going to have problems, but everybody's set of problems is going to be different. Where your sets overlap, you have an area of commonality with someone else in their scenario planning, and you can assist each other, right? You can, even though their circumstances may be entirely different, there are going to certainly be areas that will overlap with you, major national, political, et cetera, et cetera. Just is going to be up to you to locate and decide what ones you're going to concentrate on. So we're in a period of time that's going to be analogous in the way the flow goes to previous periods of time, and so we can make some projections as to lengths of time involved. And so I'm saying that we'll be in the Shadowland for about 40 years. I'm saying that based on what happened to France and their currency after the loss of their Algerian colony, right? The destruction of the Weimar currency and the effects on Germany. Now, those were more compressed, they were more isolated examples, but we can make projections. Our shadowland is very much bigger because it involves most of the Western governments of the planet having been infiltrated and taken over by the Khazarian Mafia, which we know today as the World Economic Forum et al. They have many different names. So I'm pegging this at about 40 years here, right? 40 years where things will be disruptive to some degree, and where you live that will affect how you're feeling this level of disruption as we go forward. Now, so there are things that people can do with their shadowland planning to provide for the ability to seize opportunities that will arise as a result of other people's problems. So we know, for instance, that there's going to be a shipping line. Somebody owns a bunch of ships. They're going to have problems as we go forward here. We can plot and predict that there's going to be a shipping company that's going to have problems relative to their fuel sources. We don't know which one. You know, if you're in the business, maybe you know that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is you can do this in a broad brush and they're narrowed down. If you had a mind, if you had the idea that, oh, okay, look, I've got some cash here and it's my goal to be, what was that guy's name? Aristotle Onassis, and become a shipping magnate, even though I'm not Greek. Okay, so it's my goal to own a giant shipping fleet. Well, you could actually plan on doing that, knowing that there's going to be, because we're going to go through this big ugly, we're in it now, getting into it now. We know that there's going to be shipping companies that are going to have major trouble. And if you knew all about the industry and so on, you could get yourself ready to go on in and take over and get your giant shipping fleet at a discount as we go forward. So we're in that period of time where it is feasible to, buy the Bentley for a stack of silver coins, where there's this analyst out there. He's a market analyst. I think he works with Arcadia Economics frequently. I'm unsure his name is Raffi. I think of him as Raffi the Wise. And he's of the opinion you'll be able to buy, $1 million house now, $1 million house now in the U.S. will sell once we get into the shadowland in here, probably very rapidly after we cross the big ugly. And get into the shadowland period, where everybody's recognizing that we're through and into the big ugly, that you'll be able to buy $1 million house for, I think he said 75 ounces of silver. And he's doing this on a mathematical ratio kind of thing. And maybe so. Maybe that'll be the case. And so if you were to go out now and buy your 75 ounces of silver while you can still get it, maybe, out here, and maybe that's like a year, maybe that's 6 months. I'll tell you about that in a second. But somewhere out in here, maybe you start going shopping for your $1 million house, even though the market's gone to hell, and there's no one really advertising housing for sale because they can't figure out how to accomplish the deal. You're real smart. You've picked out 5 or 6 houses that were for sale just before everything crashed. You know the addresses and stuff. You got your little stack of silver coins, and you go and contact these people and say, hey, I got some coins. Do you want to sell me your house? And so maybe one of them will. I'm just saying that that's the kind of planning you can make now that probably will pay off for you later on. And this is a probability game that you're playing in doing so. Now, there are some things that we do know in our shadowland planning that will manifest and mature. And that is that there will be a vast number of problems that will show up right here as the big ugly gets really moving there. Let me move that up a bit. As the big ugly gets right over the peak and people become aware of it, there's going to be this emotional component that will just send this whole thing through the roof. We saw it in all the fucking Great Depressions, 1891 through 1893, 1932 to 33, go back 1914 to 1917. All of them had this this component, as the population became aware that they were in the shitter, that this emotional component took off. During those period of time is when all these fantastic deals are made, because people got themselves into problems not anticipating this period of time. So they were out here in the past making deals that went sour as soon as we went into the depressive superinflation of some form. And so they had to get something to get out of there. Get themselves out from under the liability obligations or whatever that they'd encumbered themselves with back in the past here at this point. And then once they got into the after the crash, so to speak, or during the process, it became apparent to them that they needed to get out. So they had to sell the hotel, they had to sell the Bentley car, had to sell the bar or the shipping line, that kind of thing, right? And so if someone had the resources out here that they stashed, they can carry it forward in time and make some good deals. That component of the Shadowland planning is what draws corporations to it. I think it's valuable for individuals as well. I'm going to wrap this one up. I've been inundating you guys with shit here because I'd sort of slacked off because I've had the big clean. We were supposed to shift a trailer, basically a trailer and a truckload today. Not happening with the rain, so I need to readjust my plans as per this process. I'm in the feedback loop area of it, and so I will readjust my plans and go concentrate on this instead of concentrating on, the big cleanup here in that way. I'll concentrate it down here on that way, and so I adjust my plans as I go forward. Anyway, though, so we're nearly there, guys. It's going to be variously experienced. If you want to understand a small amount of what we're going through, you can look to historical representations of it, Grapes of Wrath, Cannery Row, they give you some level of the emotionality and what people had to go through and so on as money died, right? This is going to be an entirely different proposition. Now, I don't want to end on a negative note here because I'm not particularly negative about any of this. I'm very optimistic, really, because I like change. This change is necessary. The sooner we get through it, the easier it will be. All right. I'm one of those guys when the saw goes through your leg and the blood's spurting out, you lash the bugger up, roll off the roof, and call the guys to take you to the hospital, and you don't let them put you into an emergency or into an operating room. You tell them, okay, if you guys aren't going to sew that up for me right now in the emergency room, then give me those sutures and get the fuck out of here. I'll do it myself. And they will. They'll sew you up right there, because it happened to me. Hundreds of stitches. Let me tell you, boy, that guy was pissed at me. Let me tell you that. We didn't know what we were getting into. Got a wound in my leg because I was up on a roof working on cutting a hole through for a skylight, and they were unknown to me in the roofing material, which was reasonably thick because it was shakes, was a spike, right? A big nail. And it caused the saw to buck back and go through, which was a skill saw, and go through my leg. And it was like 300 plus stitches. And it would have taken hours. I would have been in the hospital for days if I'd let them take me up into that operating room to do it. And so I just insisted that the guy was imagining that it was that big of a job and he should just set to work right there. And so I started spraying the lidocaine for him and flushing it out with that mixture they got, and insisted that he start sewing. And 308 stitches later, he said, okay, fucker, I'm done. And he left. And he was really, really, really pissed. He was a decent doctor, and he wrote up the thing as a funny story for our local paper later on. But anyway, though, this is where we're at now. We're going to be pressed and pushed on. There's opportunities. I'm not okay, so I'm realistic. We got a lot of problems and we're going to go through shit. But I'm not negative in the sense that we got a lot of problems, we're going to go through shit, and then we're going to die. I'm not that way. That's not my approach. I actually think that there's a possibility for, or there is, okay, so there is hope right now. Okay, and so that's a solid thing. I have hope right now. Now, whether that hope manifests or not, whether the thing I'm hoping for manifests, is immaterial. I have optimism and hope now because of these fellows, right? Because I know the sock is out there. I've seen in the sand, so to speak, I've seen their trails. And so I know they're out there doing shit. And so I have hope that they know all of this shit that I can see and that they're doing things for something right there. And because they know as well as I do that all you have to do is lift that ban on that chemical and then diesel starts flowing again, right? That it is a legislative, it's an administrative issue. And so once we get into changes at that level, now we can actually affect our economic circumstances very rapidly and change the direction of it. But this, we're still going to go through relative to the old financial system and through all of the shit that's been hidden from us is going to occupy us in the shadow land that way at that level of emotionality for decades. So, you know, we can go back to 1891 and start looking at shit that led to the formation of the bank in 1913, that led to the blackmailing of Woodrow Wilson for his daughter, that led to the sinking of the boats with the Astors, the Vanderbilts, and the Morgans on them, right? Banking families in order to get the Federal Reserve through. So does someone in a social order level have the right to go back that far and press on these people for retribution for that? That's something that we all have to decide as we work our way through all of this shit. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Occupied enough of your time. I hope some of this has been helpful. Scenario planning has worked for me all of my life. It's never let me down. It's a pain in the ass to do sometimes, especially when you start writing all these lists and getting other people involved, but it has always prepared my mind for going forward. And now it's like, you got to get serious about it because we're heading into some serious shadowland here that's going to occupy us for this period of time. And wait till you see the normies on the street with their head exploding over all of the information that's going to be pouring out in this period of time during this 40 years. So it'll just keep happening over and over and over again as, you know, we uncover all this cache of hidden crap. But it's necessary. It's necessary that we do all of that. You know, because it's these United States, and we've got to get ready for these United States entering into sci-fi world, which is going to happen over this 40-year period of time. So, hooray! So anyway, guys, stay woo. It's, you know, what do they say? Situation hopeless, but not serious.